Welcome to the webinar on tourism and sustainable food management. I'm Dirk Gleeser, Director of the Sustainable Development of Tourism Program of UNWTO, and will be today your moderator during this session. This is the 7th Sustainable Tourism webinar organized by UN Environment and the French government. It's taking place within the framework of the 10 years framework of programs Sustainable Tourism Program. The present session is organized in partnership with the UNWTO, the lead actor of the 10YFP Sustainable Tourism Program. As many of you know, the 10YFP Sustainable Tourism Program is a collaborative platform currently involving more than 120 organizations with one common goal: to decouple the growth of tourism from the use of natural resources. The network, as you also know, offers opportunities, plenty of them, especially to aggregate the efforts of the members to accelerate sustainable consumption and production patterns. It is supporting the objectives related to the Sustainable Development Goals, especially SDG 12 on responsible consumption and production, but also the SDG 8, 13, 14, and 15 respectively on decent work, economic growth, climate action, life below water, and life on land. The network also offers possibilities for members so far not familiar in public fora, discussions, debates, with the objective to gain international visibility. The network fosters synergies across members for the implementation of future activities and the creation of fundraising coalitions. The 10YFP Sustainable Tourism Program, lastly, offers possibilities for members to exchange knowledge, to learn from each other, to share experiences, to learn from the lessons identified, to exchange best practices and the tools. This webinar series fits very well under the 4th pillar of the 10YFP Sustainable Tourism Program. Before we start now, I would like to recall a few tips for a smooth session on the GoToWebinar. All attendees will be muted. Attendees can send questions to the panelists at any time throughout the webinar by posting them in the questions box. I repeat, questions box and not the chat box. When typing a question, please indicate clearly to which of the panelists it is addressed. At the end of the webinar, questions and the panelists will share their replies. If you need to contact the organizers for other reasons, especially connection problems, please refrain from using the questions box and use the chat box instead, addressing your message only to the organizers. This session is being recorded and will be posted as from tomorrow on YouTube. Please do not hesitate to share the recording with any of the colleagues you know and the networks you are representing. Global estimates show that approximately 73 billion meals are served to tourists each and every year. The sector is responsible for a significant proportion of global food purchasing. The sector can also promote changes in food management and consumption, leading to positive environmental and economic results. The tourism sector can play an important role in raising awareness of the food and in turn contribute to the reduction of food waste, a priority for the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda under SDG target 12.3. The objectives of our today's webinar are to provide examples for methodologies for management of food and beverage value chains in the tourism sector, discuss benefits on food waste prevention, present approaches to integrate small local producers into large mainstream tourism value chains. We will now move to the first presentation of today's webinar, for which we have the pleasure to have among us the colleagues from the 10YFP Program on Sustainable Food Systems, one of the 6 programs under the overall 10YFP framework. Mr. Nout van Waart is an advocacy officer for sustainable food at the Humanist Institute for Cooperation with Developing Countries, IBUS, and also a co-lead of the 10YFP Sustainable Food Systems Program. Nout will share with us an introduction on sustainable food concepts, which are at the core of his work. Knut, you have now 10 presentation. Is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dirk, for your kind introduction. So my name is Nout van der Vaart. I work with the Humanist Institute for Development Cooperation with Developing Countries, also known as HIVOS, which has its seat in the Netherlands. I will be talking briefly today a little bit about the Sustainable Food Systems Program. HIVOS is a co-lead of the Sustainable Food Systems Program, which is one of the other 10 YFP programs. And I will talk a little bit about the SFS program, Sustainable Food Concepts, and also touch upon two examples of projects that work with sustainable food and tourism. Thank you very much. Okay, so a little bit about the SFS program, the Sustainable Food Systems Program. As I said, it was the last of the 10 YFP programs to kick off, which happened now 2 years ago, initiated by UN Environment together with the Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. And the idea is that as current food systems are not really sustainable, there is a dire need to bring back consumption and production patterns within planetary boundaries. Also, the idea is that it's necessary to address the double burden of malnutrition and non-communicable diseases like obesity, like diabetes, that have come along with changing diet patterns worldwide. So the vision of our program is that all food systems are sustainable, delivering food security and nutrition for present and future generations. And the idea is that the goal is that the stakeholders active in this food systems program together accelerate the shift towards more sustainable food systems. Next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, a couple of definitions that I won't touch upon too long for now. There's a couple of definitions that we use within the sustainable food systems by the high-level panel of experts on food systems. Well, and basically most important is the first definition. It's sustainable food system is a food system that delivers food security and nutrition for all in such a way that the economic, social, and environmental basis to generate food security and nutrition for future generations are not compromised. As we're talking about, well, food concepts in relation or in the context of tourism, I will now shortly try to touch upon it. I have to say that at least in our Sustainable Food Systems program, there is no such thing yet defined as a sustainable food concept. There is, as you can see on this slide, there's definitely various definitions for food systems and sustainable food systems, but sustainable food as a concept, it's not defined yet by one single organization. Nevertheless, I'll try to explain a little bit more on this, how we work with this idea. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there's actually no single definition, but there's various sustainability elements that you can think of when talking about sustainable food in the context of tourism. If you take tourism as a starting point, then there's obviously various ways, various elements of sustainability that could be taken into account when designing sustainable tourism projects. For example, if we're talking value chain, what kind of inputs are used, what kind of agricultural methods are used to produce the products. Well, this basically as a first point relates to of course, to environmental sustainability. Secondly, there's a main point to be made about the health impact of products that you might want to source as a tourist operator or in a tourism project. So what kind of food are we producing and providing? Thirdly, there's a sustainability element to be mentioned about the actual production circumstances relating to wages, labor circumstances, etc. This relates more to the social domain. Fourthly, a very important one, if we're talking about tourism, is that, and I will talk about that later a little bit more, that you can definitely, what makes an offer special is the traditional or regional character of food that you might provide. This is both socially as well as culturally as environmentally related to sustainability. A local culinary heritage could, for example, promote like local gastronomy. Last but not least, we can talk about no waste policies and about improving value chains by working on more efficiency to avoid losses at the beginning of the change, which can be both classified as economical elements of sustainability. Next slide, please. We touch upon two initiatives, programs that are currently being implemented or will soon start to be implemented within the context of the Sustainable Food Systems Program. The first one is a initiative on so-called sustainable and healthy gastronomy as a key driver for sustainable food systems. The purpose of these of this program, which is run by various organizations and the government of Costa Rica, is to stimulate the sustainable gastronomy sector to promote sustainable diets. So far, this project has not yet started its actual concrete implementation, but the pilot project is planned for Costa Rica, and a workshop is to be hosted by the government of Costa Rica by the end of this year, hopefully. Around the idea of revitalizing a country's, previous slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Around revitalizing a country's traditional, or let's say regional cuisine as a driver for agricultural development and strengthening production opportunities for diversified family farming systems. Next slide, please. Yeah, so a more concrete example of an initiative that has taken off under the flag of the Sustainable Food Systems Program is a program on value chain sustainability, in which the promotion of small-scale farming, of which initiatives are being promoted, linking small-scale farmers, linking producers to consumers. I'll skip this slide. I'll go to the next just to explain one case study that was done by the FAO on a community in Trinidad and Tobago, which is making agritourism its business. As you can see on this slide, the community has started this agro-tourism business 5 or 6 years ago, and there's a couple of opportunities and challenges that were identified after the project started, and they basically revolve around the next things. The challenges, the community was set up around the production of cocoa and coffee in particular, but other than that, there's a lot of other products and value chains that were developed. The challenges basically revolve around professionalization after 5 years of the project running. But the opportunities basically revolve around the ability of the people engaged to collaborate and to dedicate. There's actually 3 lessons learned from this practical case, like this community in Trinidad. And the first one is that success of community-based initiatives often relies on the impetus of a core group of dedicated people with a shared vision and willingness to work closely with each other. A second lesson of this community is that the Brasso Seco community actually successfully developed its own arrangement where agritourism benefits are shared fairly, and where there are opportunities for villagers to supply products for sale to tourists and restaurants. A third and last lessons that could be learned from this case study that the FAO did, that the Brussels Seco community has developed the capacity to engage public and private sector agencies effectively, meaning that consequently relationships have been developed between individuals such that collaboration is based on strong personal and institutional relationships. So that is the case of the Brussels Seco Paria community in Trinidad. I think I'll leave it for here. It was a very brief presentation, but I'll be happy to answer any questions after all of our presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Knut, for this introductory presentation. We look forward to the Q&A session. A reminder to all attendees, please share your questions with us, with the panelists. We will be answering them at the end of our webinar during the Q&A session. It's now time to introduce our second presenter, Professor Dagmar Lund-Durlacher, the head of the Department of Tourism and Service Management of Module University in Vienna. Professor Lund's presentation is about the application of sustainable food concepts in the holiday context. Dagmar, you have now 15 minutes for your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dirk, for this introduction, and good afternoon to all participants. It is a great pleasure for me to present the results of a research project on sustainable food, which we have conducted during the past 2 years, and which was supported and funded by Futuris, which is the sustainability initiative of the German travel industry. The reason for this project was that relatively little was known about sustainable food practices in the travel industry and how significant this topic is actually to the package tourists. Therefore, the aim of this project was that besides defining sustainable food in the holiday context, and note I'm referring to your presentation, we tried to define this concept in the context of holidays. We also aimed to identify strategies and practices for creating a more sustainable culinary offer for package tourists and to support the implementation of a more sustainable food operation in holiday destinations. What we did is that we followed a multi-method approach for our research, and we looked at different perspectives. First, we have looked into international best practices and assessed 7 sustainability certification schemes. We also have visited cruise ships and 12 hotel resorts in 2 holiday destinations, Gran Canaria and Antalya, and we have analyzed the food operations. And last but not least, we have surveyed nearly 8,000 package tourists regarding their expectations, attitudes, and expectations towards sustainable food. The results of our studies are available in a comprehensive research report, which at the moment is only available in German, but we plan to release this information also in English very soon. But more importantly, and you see here already the website address, we also have compiled a handbook for practitioners, which contains extensive recommendations for hotels how to implement sustainable food operations. Next slide, please. So here you see the layout of the handbook. This handbook is structured along the food process chain and gives an overview as well as recommendations for sustainable sourcing, the sustainable menu planning, food preparation and presentation, as well as communication of food offers, management and the implementation of food strategies. Soon, this handbook will be also translated to other languages such as Spanish and Turkish, because it really is targeted to practitioners in the holiday destinations. It can be downloaded for free from the Futuris website. Next slide. So, based on this literature review and the systematic assessment of food-related sustainability certification schemes, we have developed a checklist with 44 criteria along the food production and consumption process and a structured interview guideline to explore the managers' attitudes and expectations towards sustainable food. We did the data collection in December 2015 and January 2016 in the 2 destinations, Gran Canaria and Antalya. and have done quite a number of interviews, observations, and all and so on. Next slide, please. So I'm going to present now in the remaining time of my presentation the key results of our research, and for the hotels in Gran Canaria and Antalya, and also of the customer survey. So you see here the results when we look at the use of regional, seasonal, organic and fair trade foods. The hotel representatives who were interviewed value local food very often and perceived its quality higher than imported food. However, the two destinations which we have investigated show very different results with respect to the use of this local produce. While in Gran Canaria, a destination with limited agricultural production and relatively high prices, the sourcing of local produce is low. In Turkey, where the agricultural production is high, the comparable products on offer is extensive. So we can see here that price or the costs of local produce is of course a key factor when choosing food suppliers. Several hotel owners in Turkey also operate their own farms. Some are even farms with an organic production and can therefore supply the properties with fresh fruits and vegetables. Regarding the fair trade concept, which is quite known here in Middle Europe, this is largely unknown to the hotel representatives in the destinations. Some hotels, however, check if their suppliers comply with social regulations, for example, minimum working age or social security. Organic products also play a minor role in the destinations. In the hotels which offer organic food, the share varies between 2 and 10%. So it's really a very low share of the total food offered. The reason for this low percentage is mainly the higher costs of organic produce. Additionally, there is uncertainty about organic certification schemes in the holiday destination. Especially in Turkey, for example, it is hard to find an organic food certification schemes, and therefore some of the hotels which offer organic food do not label them at all. Nevertheless, we think that buying fair and organic produce and communicating this to the customers can be a competitive advantage. What you can see that tourists care a lot about local products. The chart shows that more than 70% of the tourists said that food and drinks are a good way to become acquainted with local cultures, and that they prefer meals, local meals to familiar ones, and that they prefer regionally produced food, which is important to them. So it really can be said that local foods could be a good means to gain a competitive advantage and satisfy the customers. Next slide, please. There are huge differences in the extent and composition of food arrangements in the hotels. The amount of food offered per guest and day is highest among the all-inclusive offers, which we find, which is very, very common in holiday destinations. And we found that up to 4.3 kilograms per guest and day is offered. So this can be really seen as one of the most unsustainable food arrangements. The composition of the food offer is very much influenced by culture and tradition in the destinations, and also the perceived expectation of the guest. For example, in Gran Canaria, the food offer contains more meat and a great variety of food because the guests expect this. They want to have everything available at any time. Through culture and tradition, and they offer lots of seasonal, fresh and regional food. Yeah, next slide, please. Regarding resource efficiency in the kitchen. It was found that energy and water consumption in the kitchen and F&B area are usually not monitored separately. Therefore, it's hard to really control this energy and water usage. But in all hotels, there's a great awareness of this energy efficiency, and energy efficiency standards for new acquisitions and replacements of kitchen equipment are in place. Measures to save water in the kitchen are viewed critically because water is used to keep the hygiene standards high and are also an ingredient of dishes. So definitely it would be very beneficial to introduce measurement of monitoring of energy and water usage in the F&B area. Next slide, please. So the presentation of dishes has a strong impact whether the guest will like the sustainable menu if you create one. Furthermore, a good food presentation also helps to reduce waste and leftovers and subsequently also reduce the costs. In holiday resorts, the typical board, as I've said earlier, is all-inclusive in the form of buffets, and these buffets are filled up continuously. Although many hotels already have measures in place to reduce food waste, like towards the end of the buffet hours, less plates are refilled or smaller flatter containers or tablets are used, and the focus is shifted to front cooking. Some hotels also reduce portion and plate size at the buffets. Also, single portions are still very rare. Looking again at the customer survey and the chart on the bottom of the slide, more than 55% of the travelers agree this helps to reduce scraps. So there's a chance actually for hotels to reduce waste and leftovers. Next slide, please. A beautiful presentation of food is ineffective if it's not accompanied by effective communication. Research has shown that many change processes, such as introducing a more sustainable menu, do not work because of a lack of communication. In the visited hotels, in general, the extent of information on the food offer varies, but in general, little information is given to the guests. Indications of origin of food, organic or fair trade, are rare. On the other hand, there's a strong influence of the new EU Allergen Act and new dietary needs like vegan, vegetarian, lactose-free when creating food tags, which have to contain this information. When we look again at the results of the customer survey, information seems to be very important for this. They want about the origin and production of the food and drinks they consume. And in addition, they also want to be informed already at the start of their vacation. Furthermore, almost 50% strongly agree that hotels or cruise lines that offer sustainable food should be indicated in travel catalogs or online. So that can refer to as a booking or a decision factor in the booking process. Next slide, please. Now the waste production or reduction, about 20 to 60%, and that's quite a lot, of all food purchased by the hotel and restaurant industry is wasted. We have collected this data during our site visits. This is not only poor cost management, but also highly questionable from an ethical and social point of view. Moreover, food waste may also harm the environment for food decomposition in landfills, which gives off methane gas. There are hardly any food waste review systems in place in the visited hotels, but as I've said previously, in the buffet, we already find some measures to reduce waste. Also, untouched leftovers on the buffet are used differently due to the legal requirements. In Europe, the HACCP hygiene standards require that all food which left the kitchen has to be dumped. In contrary, a different concept in Turkey, under the control of a hygiene officer, untouched food of the buffet can be processed further, if special legal requirements are met, and that of course reduces the waste. There are huge difference in the awareness levels and behavior regarding food depending on the nationality of age of guests. So guests are behaving differently when creating waste. And knowledge raising, therefore, is very important among guests, but also among kitchen staff and yeah, guests, I said. Next slide, please. Yeah, management survey, we found that sustainable food strategies were rarely incorporated, that only sporadic sustainable food measures were found, and that there is generally little awareness of food sustainability among staff. When there were some measures implemented, then it was because of cost advantages, or that the management supported the implementation, or there was external pressure like the legal regulations, or tour operators who are requesting more sustainable food offer, or criteria and certification schemes. The barriers are mainly lack of awareness and knowledge among management and staff. Next slide, please. Yeah, conclusion, sustainable food is very important to tourists. You could see that, especially there is a tendency towards regionality, but this regional food is hardly communicated by the hotels, and this is a chance to really gain a competitive advantage. The key success factors for implementing sustainability is full support of the hotel management, education and training of employees, and guest communication. Additional drivers can be tour operators who claim a more sustainable food offers of their contracted hotels, and also modification of existing certification schemes when introducing sustainable food criteria. Next slide, please. Because before I end my presentation, I just want to put some attention on a new pilot project we just have completed. It's about sustainable food signage and the communication of sustainable food to the tourists. We have done a study now again in Gran Canaria with 2 holiday hotels. We have developed communication instruments for 2 scenarios to communicate local food and waste reduction. Next slide, please. Here you see some of this signage which was used in the lobby, at the guest tables, and at the buffets. Next slide, please. And we really had promising results because the communication tools which we had introduced in the 2 hotels, they led to an immediate behavioral change on the part of the guests, and we had a reduction of 15% of edible plate waste, and up to an increase of 300% of local food. So also this communication tools will soon be available at the Futurist website, which supported us again with this project. So at the end, I provide some resources for further reading, and I thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you, Dagmar, very much for sharing the research and the findings on the application of sustainable food concepts. In your case as well, we look very much forward to the Q&A session. Please bear with us, stand ready to answer the questions which we are receiving. An invitation again to all those participating in today's webinar that you please post your question box. For our 3rd presentation, we have now the opportunity to learn from the Travel Foundation, one of the oldest members of the 10YFP Sustainable Tourism Program. Wendy Moore is the head of research and evaluation, and Terry Brown is the destination program officer at the Travel Foundation. They will be delivering together a presentation on critical success factors in developing agri-tourism value chains. Wendy, Terry, you have now 15 minutes for your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and good afternoon to all participants. We're going to base this presentation on one of the Travel Foundation's successful projects called Taste of Feta. This was a 4-year agro-linkages project, which ended in 2015, and it was implemented in Turkey. As the name implies, it was about enabling local farmers to sell fresh fruit and vegetables to hotels. But rather than describing activities in detail, what I'm going to do is just talk you through what we learned from the project. And if you are interested in reading more about the project, the case study is available online on the Travel Foundation's website. So to start us off, I'd just like you to imagine you're the general manager of a hotel. You manage an all-inclusive mainstream hotel with 300 rooms. What might motivate you to buy local produce? So just take a few moments to think about it or discuss with someone next to you and write down your answers. So if you're a general manager of a 300-bed all-inclusive hotel, what would motivate you to buy local produce?
Barry, we lost you.
Next slide, please. No, I'm giving people a chance to have a think. Thank you. So, in short, our answer to this is that it depends on various factors. When we launched the Taste of Feta initiative, we made a number of assumptions as to what would motivate hotels to buy through the initiative. And I'm going to talk you through some of the critical success factors, as well as some other lessons that we learned along the way. Time is short, so I'll introduce them briefly, and we look forward to any questions that you may have at the end of the webinar. Next slide, please. So our first assumption was regards to the amount of influence tour operators would have over hotels. As most large hotels in the region have exclusive contracts or major contracts with international tour operators, we assume that these tour operators would influence hotels to buy from the Taste of Feta initiative. And that was our initial strategy. And what we discovered, however, was that tour operators have a lot less influence than we had anticipated. And that was even the case when the tour operators owned the hotel. Next slide, please. To awards and certification schemes. We assumed that since most sustainable tourism awards and certification schemes include local procurement criteria, that large mainstream hotels would therefore be motivated to buy locally and achieve these awards and certifications. We discovered, however, that on the whole, this was much less of a motivating factor for hotels than we had expected. We think this is because the hotels are not actually responsible for marketing themselves. Instead, the marketing is done by tour operators who then in turn bring in the customers. Next slide, please. So the third lesson to bear in mind if you're setting up a project of this type is in relation to consumer demand. And this is related to the previous presentation. So it's important to test consumer demand and for the project to be demand driven in the first place. And for example, we found no evidence that mainstream tourists are demanding local produce. Now that isn't to say that they don't care about it or they don't value it when they're served it. And that's as has been indicated in the previous presentation by Professor Lund-Dahleke. So we'll pick up on this point later. Next slide, please. The following lesson is something that we learned based on something that we'd underestimated, and that's the importance of PR opportunities, public relations opportunities. Interestingly, we found that the majority, the opportunity for PR was a bigger motivating factor than we'd assumed. Hotels were particularly keen on opportunities for PR in consumer-facing publications, such as tour operator brochures. They were also interested in PR opportunities in the local press, and as I say, that was a lot more than we'd imagined. Next slide, please. We also expected quality and particularly safety standards to be a high priority for hotels when we were designing the project. And surprisingly, most with the freshness and appearance of produce. So something to bear in mind when setting up projects such as this is that from our experience, hotels tend to start off with a very negative or quite a negative assumption about the quality of local produce. So it is an important area to focus on. And to achieve the consistency in product quality, we actually carried out a lot of substantial training with farmers on good agricultural practices. And as a result, we were able to demonstrate how local produce did in fact meet international safety and quality standards. And in some cases, the standard of taste of Feta produce was actually higher than that of local suppliers. Next slide, please. So thinking back to earlier on when I asked you to note down some ideas about what motivates mainstream hotels to buy locally, how many of you wrote down price as a main motivating factor? I suspect quite a lot of you, and you obviously a major factor for the hotels. And interestingly, it was often the larger hotels which were more price sensitive than the smaller ones, and that's because they have smaller margins. Having said that, most hotels were not willing to pay higher than market prices for local produce. Thankfully, the Taste of Feta initiative was able to produce local produce at market prices. Next slide, please. So this is another important critical success factor that I'm sure many of you will have already guessed, the ease of doing business. What was more important was the ease in which hotels could order and receive their produce. As hotels, they just want to buy the produce they want when they want it in the most simple way possible. So you have to make it easy for them. For example, some hotels were used to fulfilling most of their food and beverage requirements through one main supplier, and they had used that same supplier for years and reluctant to change, and even change. This is especially the case when they had built up a really good personal relationship with suppliers. Next slide, please. Doing the right thing, supporting local businesses and the local economy, was a higher priority for hotels than we had anticipated. This is especially the case for hotels that were locally owned or managed. Next slide, please. So I've just gone through fairly quickly, obviously, those top critical success factors which we'd identified, which are summarized here on this slide. And these are actually listed in order of importance. So you might want to compare that to the ones you jotted down. Obviously, at the top here, we have price and ease of doing business, followed by PR opportunities, safety and quality standards, and doing the right thing. Towards the bottom, you have tour operator pressure and influence, awards and certification, and consumer. Next slide, please. So in summary, we learned that it's really important to understand what motivates your target market. And it's really important to test your assumptions, both at the beginning of the project and throughout, building that into your strategy of the implementation. We also learned that different hotels have different needs and motivations, and therefore you need to design your engagement strategies accordingly. So the key lessons are always test your demand and always test your assumptions. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we also learned a few other things along the way doing this project, which we feel are important to share with you in terms of developing agri-tourism linkages projects. It's really important that you are able to provide hotels with all that they want when they want it in relation to fresh produce. Most large hotels, for example, aren't prepared to buy just a few different vegetables or for just part of the season. Ideally, you want to be able to provide them with all of their fresh produce requirements across the season. So we were able to do this by working with different farmers growing different crops at different altitudes. And to do this, we set up a centralized management system to ensure production was organized to meet the needs of hotels. So basically, the system helps the initiative to understand what volumes and types of products the hotels required, and then organise the production accordingly. Next slide, please. Another critical success factor is the importance of intermediaries. Some people think it's best to link producers directly with hotels and cut out the middleman or the middlewomen, such as Koshkun, a local wholesaler who's pictured in this photo. Our experience has shown, however, that this doesn't work at scale. So if you imagine you're a procurement manager of a large hotel and you have to negotiate contracts with 50 separate suppliers, and that's just for your fruit and vegetables, your job would quickly become untenable. Intermediaries are essential if you want to be able to provide hotels with a reliable supply of and different types of produce. So that's why, to deliver Taste of Feta produce, we worked with 2 main wholesalers. Next slide, please. It's important to demonstrate to hotels the value of buying locally, and value obviously depends on the perspective of the hotelier. Aside from cost savings, most hotels were interested in the impact that buying from Taste of Feta had on their customers. I mentioned in an earlier slide that although your average mainstream tourist may not be demanding local produce, that customers do still value local produce when it's served to them. And through this project, we were able to demonstrate that when hotels did serve Taste of Feta produce, it enhanced customer experience and made customers more likely to recommend the hotel to others, and in some cases even made them more likely to return. Next slide, please. Essential to all successful relationships, so it could be argued, and that is trust. The project relied on multiple layers of trust. So, for example, the hotels needed to be able to trust the wholesalers. The wholesalers needed to deliver consistent quality produce at the agreed price to the hotels. Secondly, the wholesaler needed to be able to trust the farmers. The farmers needed to grow and deliver produce on time to the agreed standards. And finally, the farmers needed to be able to trust the wholesaler. The wholesaler needed to buy their produce and pay them on time for it. So all of these stakeholders were interdependent and needed to rely on each other for the Taste of Feta initiative to be a success. And if any of these links are broken, then the project will fail. Next slide, please. So it's clear we learned quite a lot from this project, but what did the initiative actually achieve? Well, here are a few statistics to illustrate the results. These are up to the end of 2015, when the project ended. So we have, for example, I'll just read a few for you. So 24 hotels had purchased Taste of Feta produce. 200,000 tourists had eaten Taste of Feta produce. And there had been a 24% increase in farmers' revenue since the project started. And on the right-hand side here is a picture of the UN WTO Ulysses Award for Innovation in Non-Governmental Organizations. The Travel Foundation is proud to have been awarded the prize of first runner-up in this. So that concludes our presentation on the critical success factors for developing agritourism value chains. If you're interested, as I said at the start, in reading more about this, then please do look at the case study on the Travel Foundation's website. Otherwise, Wendy and I will look forward to your questions in the questions and answer session shortly. Thank you very much for listening.
Terry, Wendy, thank you very much for the presentation. And not only is the story featured on the website, it is also featured in the recently released version of the annual magazine of the 10YFP Sustainable Tourism Program. And it's fantastic, Terry and Wendy, to hear right now from you additional insights about the way you have found sustainable food being implemented and the lessons you have learned through this project. Now, we turn to our fourth presentations today, and we'll be focusing on a business case study for food waste prevention by Benjamin Philibert, Managing Director of Light Blue Environmental Consulting, also one of the partners of the 10YFP Sustainable Tourism Program. Benjamin, you have now 15 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I know my last name is not the easiest one to pronounce, so don't worry. I'm not offended. And I used to take it personally to be the last presenter, always being the person between the audience and their lunch. Is not the case here. I actually try to see it the other way, as in like the best for the end. Well, okay. So thank you very much. What I want to present today is actually something that we are very proud of. It's the result of 4 years of trying, ideation, trying, adjusting, retrying, testing, and actually this is kind of the spin-off of our food waste prevention program, initially designed by Liveblue, which we turned to be, if I'm not mistaken, the first standard in industry that is focusing specifically on food waste prevention. Next, please. This program actually it's interesting because we realized that actually there was a need for such a standard in the industry for several reasons, and those actually that are listed on the screen are what were kind of the bottlenecks or the roadblocks that we faced. All habits die hard. I don't know how many times you tried, but I've been experiencing the hard way to speak with the chef that have been doing their job for like more than 20, 30 years sometimes, and to tell them that they are wasting. Well, you better run fast. Then we realized that there was a huge perception gap. What I mean by that is, like, first time we decided to try our initiative in a hotel, I asked the chef, okay, how many kilos do you think you're wasting on a daily basis? And the chef was like, 15, maybe 20 kilos. So we started to implement our monitoring system, and it turns out that it was more than 200 kilos per day. So huge perception gap, and still, like, on and on. I invite you to try this with professionals from the industry and ask them the question. Basically, they have no clue. What was interesting as well was to realize that throughout the industry, there was very little data, and we're talking about 4 years ago. Now there are more and more studies coming up, but still, it is very much absent, especially in the hotel industries in particular. And I'm talking about the largest hotel groups that are now leading the market, usually do not have data. But most importantly, and I think that's one of our biggest breakthrough, is to realize that hoteliers tend to look at incomplete financial KPIs, and for this, I'm thinking in particular of the food cost percentage. And we were amazed, like, to realize how many of them were solely basing their decision or being satisfied about their current situation by looking at their food cost percentage, while actually there is so much room for improvement, even with a pretty healthy food cost percentage. Next, please. So we came out with what we call the Pledge on Food Waste, which is this independently verified, so third-party verified certification process that is designed for the tourism industry, and specifically for hotel and restaurant and the MICE industry, that is focused on waste. Proud to have organizations that are endorsing our initiatives, and including the UNDP. And currently in Thailand, the Thai government as well is actually providing financial support for those that are implementing this certification program in their organization. Next, please. So the pledge is actually articulated around 9 key guidelines. I call them guidelines because they are not criteria. You have sub-criteria for each of those 9 points, but I think the way we outline the entire certification process is first very tangible and very comprehensive. So as you can see, the first one is the hotel or the restaurant has to have a food waste policy in place that is signed, that is shared and on display as well in the facilities. Central to any food waste prevention program is a monitoring system. So this is as well one of the key criteria. We are helping as well to provide some basic KPIs, and by KPIs, they are mainly financial KPIs. And I was talking about lack of understanding of the actual situation. That is as well, we found out that very large hotel, if you ask them, okay, how many kilos do you buy on a monthly basis? And it is not part of their actual records. They can tell you how much they purchased in dollar figure, but they can't tell you how many kilos they purchased and what is the ratio purchased per cover. And this is highly disturbing when you think of it. Next, please. So the first one is actually, we have been collecting throughout the industry best practices, and this ranges from purchasing to receiving to storage to mise en place, preparation, buffet, plate. And we are helping those that are taking the standard to compare what are their existing practices to those best practices. We encourage them, and this is really related to the way we usually our partners, is to build based on a cross-departmental approach. Too often, responsibilities are in the hands of the executive chef, and that's way too easy, as in like, this is your burden. We are advocating for a cross-departmental approach where we have F&B, kitchen, stewarding, finance, marketing, and HR playing a fundamental role in kind of coordinating and implementing the certification program. And the sixth criteria or guideline is actually to ensure that training is delivered to employees. It was mentioned in the previous presentation, but ensuring that first awareness raising, why are we doing it? And it's amazing how often programs are implemented and we tend to forget the why. And second, what is in there for you? And this is as well a great learning from previous projects. You need to define some basic incentives for your staff so they accept to change their habits. Next, please. The seventh criteria is actually to engage clients, because obviously there is a fair amount of the food waste that is generated on the plate by the customers, and this is something that we're still facing a lot of resistance from hotel owners or hotel managers. They are very, very cautious about talking about food waste. It's still like, you know, this non-topic, as in like everybody's trying to pretend that there is no food waste, even though everybody knows there is, and they still believe that more is better. So we are trying to get that shift and get them like to look at things differently, and as it was presented earlier, to take it as a competitive advantage. The eighth guideline is to run campaigns, and especially at the canteen during lunchtime, where we are providing guideline on how to engage with your staff, and again, not only those in the kitchen, but everyone, about how damaging the food waste can be on the environment, but the social aspect as well, which is very important, to try to get everyone like in this sort of joint effort. And finally, the last guideline is about finding ways to redistribute food. And if you follow the food waste pyramid, prevention is on the top. The second best option is to redistribute for human consumption. The third best option is to feed animals. And then the fourth is to transform it to either fertilizer or something else. And then down the line, you have like landfill. So this is to encourage them to at least try to look out for food banks or other alternative than the landfill. Next, please. So our approach, yeah, you can click several times. Yeah, our approach is basically like it's phase one is usually we come on site and help them to build that awareness, to implement that monitoring system, and to gain that basic understanding, and then providing guidelines on what are the content of all the available. And this kind of ongoing commitment that will pay off both financially and in terms of staff engagement. Next, please. So yeah, again, click 1, 2, 3. I mentioned like raising awareness is just fundamental. The same way the monitoring system. What you don't measure, you don't manage. I used to be not such a big fan, but we found out that it was just like incredibly powerful. And building capacity with your different departments to review what are the existing, what I call SOPs, standard operating procedures, and see how to adapt those that are the most wasteful based on the data collected. Next, please. There is currently put at disposal for those that are implementing this system the access to a food access monitoring platform that helps again like to collect, analyze, and basically provide tangible information related to the waste. Does it belong to, which outlet is the most wasteful, which day of the week is the most wasteful, etc., and see a trend to understand how are we performing now compared to 1 month ago, 6 months ago, etc. Next, please. Click. So very importantly, I think that the pledge on food waste helps as well through the monitoring system to have some sort of a bird's eye view and identify what we call the food waste generation points. Because as we discussed earlier, food is actually being lost at each of those steps that food is going through in the hotel industry in particular, and most of the time focus is on the plate waste and on the buffet waste, but that is forgetting that from our studies, more than 50% of all food waste is actually happening before it reaches a plate or buffet line, and that was as well another big breakthrough. Is like most of the food waste is actually pre-consumer food waste. Next, please. Are figures that we're very proud of because if you don't get the buy-in from your employees, it is almost like an impossible mission. It is very much an uphill battle. And those changes that are linked to HR commitment, incentives, sharing the responsibilities and the ownership brought some very interesting results when it comes to change of perspective, in particular about food waste from the employees. Next, please. Financial savings, obviously, was the thing that for us was the most important in order to engage with more partners, and it is mind-blowing what can be achieved through a comprehensive program, financially speaking. Because, well, from our experience being B2B, it's if you don't have that, nobody cares about the rest. So we have been struggling, but when we finally had the first findings, so happy to see that savings can reach up to 100,000 USD per year plus. And in Thailand, we're actually benefiting from governmental subsidies that are helping hotels or organizations to join this initiative. They receive some subsidies, financial subsidies. Next, please. And obviously I would say the icing on the cake, because even though like what was presented before by Terry it's a great eye opener for us. But it's more like personal. PR is essential. We try to put it as a last kind of good benefit, but ultimately this is important as well for them to be able to communicate more transparently about their efforts. As I said earlier, to kind of go around this resistance to transparency or this shame that is related to food waste. Next, please. One of the last slide I want to present is actually a case study from one of the hotel we are still collaborating with. Fantastic carbon emission cuts by almost 60 tons and great financial savings. Next, please. Yeah, and those are some of the partner organization that we have been working with, and I welcome any question that you may have. Please contact us.
Benjamin, thank you very much for your presentation. As it was the case in the previous presentation, the Taste for Feta, your work on innovation and circularity through the pledge has also been featured in our annual magazine released last week. We We thank you very much for providing us additional insights and look forward to the Q&A session. To all attendees, please continue posting your questions, Q&As. And now I have the pleasure to address the first question to Knut. Knut, one of the participants asked whether the FAO is still engaging in projects like the Brazo Seco Paria community project, and whether it would be possible to develop such a project in Colombia.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dirk, and thank you very much for that question as well. I have to clarify, the FAO was not the implementing partner of this project. It was the actual the community itself, the community supported agriculture initiative, as it is. FAO did the examination of the results, basically, and I must say that I don't know yet about any of their future plans. Of course, I can check, which I will. So I'm happy, yeah, if the person that posed this question gets back to me personally. But I would have to check, because it's not implemented by myself, but by a partner organization of the FAO.
Thank you, Knut, for this. And the next question is directed to Dagmar. Dagmar, participants were asking here for two different things. First of all, what do you mean by modifying certification? And the second question was related to the evidence, and we heard that also in different presentations, how important the evidence is. And here it was the concrete question: is there research existing which provides evidence what food waste is produced in the tourism sector, but not directly related to hotels, meaning to secondary homes or to places like Airbnb?
Mm-hmm. First, I address the question to the certification schemes. It means that more criteria on sustainable food operations could be implemented, which would actually help also to monitor, because what we noticed is that many hotels had adopted some kind of certification schemes, and where there were criteria existent, data was available. And that was not the case, for example, for electricity and water efficiency or usage in the kitchen, because there was no criteria existent. And so modifying the certification schemes would also mean that we could, at least for the hotels which are adopting such certification schemes, that we would have a better data availability and could monitor efficiency. And of course, if you know where you use your energy and your water, and where you have a high use, you can then introduce measures to actually reduce this water and energy usage. Dirk, are you still here? Okay, the second question referring to data availability for food waste in the tourism sector outside of the hotels like Airbnb or second homes. I'm not aware of such data existing, but of course we know how much food waste, or there is data available for food waste in households in general. We have an initiative in Germany and Austria called United Against Waste, and they are actually collecting this information. And according to them, every German citizen is wasting about 400 grams food per day. But we really have to think about food, the different occurrences of food waste, like Benjamin has mentioned. There's lots of food waste already occurring in storage and in the preparation of food, and then of course also in the buffets, for example, in the hotel, in the presentation of the food, and also in the consumption of food. So we have to be aware of which food waste we are talking about. Is it edible food waste, or is it food waste which actually is produced during the whole production production process.
Thank you, Dagmar. The next question is addressed to Wendy and Terry. It is related to the relationships which need to be built and which you presented during your presentation. And basically, the success factors you highlighted here were questioned. So, Wendy, Terry, if you can make the statement again, what does it mean? How do you train farmers? How do you bring these different partners together and make that a lasting partnership?
Hi, it's Wendy. I'll answer this one. It's a very big question, actually. First of all, in terms of how you train the farmers, we used agricultural experts, and we also worked with the Ministry of the Environment to develop and disseminate good agricultural guidelines. But the training was based very much on what the hotels need in terms of quality and variety. So once we understood what the tourism industry needed, then we could train farmingly. What else did you ask? How the farmers were trained? What was the second part of the question?
The second part of the question was how do you make these relationships you explained before being so crucial? How do you make them lasting? The relationships between the wholesalers, the farmers, making that reliable chains so that hotels continue purchasing and purchasing these products.
I think it was, as Terry said, it's very much about trust, and it's about everyone delivering what they promise. So if we ensure that the farmers continue to produce good quality food, then the wholesaler will buy it and pay for it, and the hotels in turn will also buy it. So I think it's just maintaining the quality standards throughout, and then there's no reason for it to fail. If everyone can deliver at the right price when it's needed, then it should be a success. And actually, it's been 2 years now since our project finished. 2017 figures are very strong again. We've still got the original hotels on board plus new hotels, and this year I think we're looking at $3 million in hotel sales, or sales to hotels and restaurants. So I think that shows that if something is set up in a way that is commercially viable, there's no reason for those relationships to break down.
Wendy, thank you very much. It was at some moments a bit difficult to understand, but now let's turn to Benjamin with one question from a participant from Morocco, stating that many of the businesses in Morocco are small and medium-sized types. The question is your monitoring system also suitable for these kind of establishments?
Yes, absolutely. Because the hotel we work with, the one I shared the findings, or the case study, actually, Sampran in Thailand, is a fairly small hotel, 4-star, outside of Bangkok. And most importantly, the type of equipment that are needed to implement a monitoring system is ultra basic. What has to be robust behind is all the training of the staff and the right standard procedures about like recording and monitoring and assigning roles and responsibilities. But if you look at the equipment only, we're talking about different sets of bins with different colors, printing material, like stickers and posters and stuff like that. That are very inexpensive, plus some scales to make the measurements, and ultimately about the monitoring itself is not a big deal. And one of the tip I would say I would give is I would recommend, if that's something you're interested in, to start small. and start with one of your outlets, like choose the restaurant that is the most that has the most number of guests, the higher number of guests, and try maybe just with 2 bins, what is food waste generated in the kitchen and what is food waste generated by the customer. Very, very low investment needed, and start tracking those data, and you will see how those data will actually influence the way you're preparing and serving the food.
Benjamin, thank you very much. We have to come now to an end. That does not mean that you cannot continue asking questions to the panelists. The last slide will show the email address to which you can send these questions, and we will be happy to continue engaging with you. This was the 7th Sustainable Tourism webinar organized by UN Environment and the French government within the framework of the 10 YFP Sustainable Tourism Program. The session, as you heard, was moderated by UNWTO. We are very thankful for the panelists, for their time they made available to network and to inspire all of us. I also want to thank those behind the scene who have made today's webinar a success from our point of view. We reached the maximum number of attendees during this webinar. Thank you, Svetlana. Thank you, Virginia. Thank you all. Let's stay in touch. Goodbye.